guys, in the last unit we primarily focused on independent clauses. So this time around we're going to talk about dependent clauses. Remember that most of the punctuation rules are going to make more sense if you're clear on the difference between a phrase and a clause. So if you want to go back and review that distinction just one more time, be sure to pop back to the 1.1 conventions video to take another look. Otherwise, we will dive in. So the simplest difference in remembering independent clauses and dependent clauses is that independent clauses can stand alone. So you can have an independent clause that appears in your paper and it can be a sentence all by itself. Okay? A dependent clause, as the name implies, is dependent on more information to make it make sense. A dependent clause cannot appear in a paper all by itself. If it does, it's a sentence fragment. A dependent clause needs an independent clause to sort of finish the thought or give us the rest of the story of the information that appears in this guy. So dependent clauses, remember that a clause contains a subject and a verb. Subject acting on a verb. Dependent clauses still contain those, but they also contain special words called subordinating conjunctions. That's a really fancy grammatical term. I don't want you to have to remember that. We're just going to call them dependent words. Okay? There are over 70 dependent words in the English language. I'm not going to go through all of them. However, after some practice, you start to recognize them and be able to identify them when you're reading your sentences. Words like if, after, because, during, due to, although, before, because. All of these become very recognizable as dependent words. When they come at the beginning of a clause, they cause it to be dependent. So let's say we have this construction appearing in our paper, okay, when I get up in the morning. If we do this and put a period right here, it's pretty easy to see that this can't sit here all by itself. Why? Because the reader is wondering what happens when I get up in the morning. We need additional information. Remember that this is still a clause. If this word wasn't here, this could still stand alone in the paper, okay? But because we have this word, we need to finish the thought. We need more information. If I add this is an independent clause. If it were on its own, it could function in the paper all by itself, okay? Combined with the dependent clause, we have this kind of more interesting construction that tells us that at the moment I get up, pretty much, I make coffee, right? As soon as I get up in the morning, I make coffee. A dependent clause lets us know dependent or simultaneous action, things that happen at the same time or things that happen as a result of something else, okay? When you have a dependent clause, there are two ways you can punctuate it, okay? Our second comma rule, I'm going to go ahead and put this here for you, is that when a dependent clause precedes its independent clause, when the dependent clause comes first, we place a comma after it, okay? If, however, we were to write the construction this way, the dependent clause comes second, and we don't place any punctuation before it. Why not? Well, to be honest with you, I've never been able to find a very good grammatical explanation for that. But think of it like this. If the dependent clause comes first, we're waiting for the main subject and verb to make it make sense. Okay, there's a little suspense here. There's a little bit of a pause. We're letting the reader know that the main subject and verb are still coming. When it's written this way, the main subject and verb have already appeared. We already have them here. We're not waiting for anything. We can read straight into that dependent clause. Never place a comma here between the independent and the dependent because you'll actually create a sentence fragment by doing that. Okay? So the simple version is if the dependent clause comes first, put a comma here. If it comes second, don't put a comma here. Now, along with that comma rule, this applies both to dependent clauses and to introductory phrases. Introductory phrases, remember, they don't contain a subject acting on a verb, even if they contain a noun, or if they contain a verb, or if they contain both, right? They're not clauses, they're just phrases. So they could be kind of throwaway terms, but they add a little bit of additional interest to whatever you're writing. They might be things like this: later that day, after the party, just over the hill, down the road, in the back seat, over time, etc. These function according to the same rule. If they come before the clause, okay, if they precede the clause, I'm going to scoot this down just to make it a little bit clearer. Okay, later that day, we pause here, they went to algebra class. This is our independent clause. Just over the hill, here's our independent clause. He found the gas station. Over time, the students learn the concepts well, so we need commas here. However, if that introductory phrase comes at the end of the sentence, again, no comma precedes it. Okay? So be sure to practice with this. It takes a little time to identify these or to get really good at identifying these in your work. But once you get a feel for it, it gets much easier. All right, we're going to wrap up with a rule that pretty much everybody thinks they know, but a little bit of a twist. So I'm going to come down here. So our comma rule number 3 is that we need to place a comma with a conjunction in items in a series. Lots of, again, fancy grammatical speak. So let's say we've written ourselves a shopping list. I need to get bacon, green onions, sour cream, and cheddar cheese. So everybody knows that we need to put a comma here after bacon and here after green onions. And then you've heard at some point in your life that right here, we don't necessarily need a comma if it's not likely that the reader is going to get confused. That's actually not true anymore. The only writers who still adhere to that rule are journalists. Everybody else, it doesn't matter where you're going. Health sciences, if you're going to be a history teacher, if you're going into math, if you're going into business, no matter where you go, everyone now requires that you place a comma here. So I'm not sure whether you need to open a window, get some Febreze, or just burn the house down. We need a comma with this conjunction before we deliver that final piece of information. Same thing here. Maura ate all the pizza, drank all the soda, and devoured all the dessert. Okay? Always place a comma with this conjunction. Your instructor is going to be looking for it. And so make sure going forward that every time you write a list, you stick this final comma in your series.